Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Top 10 players for this UCLA program heading into 2024. And Dill, exciting times around this UCLA program. DeShaun Foster taking over. You see the momentum, the buzz that they're building on the recruiting trail. And then you look at heading into the Big Ten in 2024. I don't know anybody across the country that is higher on this UCLA program than you are heading into 2024. You're going to get the opportunity to sell us on this UCLA team heading into the fall, fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And it's been a blast taking deep dives into all of these programs during the summer months. The amount of support, it's been absolutely amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And for the UCLA fans, a lot of new faces. If you guys have any players that we are sleeping on, let us know in the comment section. We always learn a ton from you guys as we do these deep dives. And the UCLA fans have been awesome to the boys. So it's been a blast talking this program on the recruiting trail, new head coach, new conference. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. And without further ado, let's get into the list. And Dill, let's start with, just a few of my guys. Ethan Garbers. Brian Addison is very intriguing coming from Oregon. And then Sharif Saeed, a guy that's kind of flying under the radar, went back and checked his numbers from Florida A&M. He plays some really good football at the FCS level. Now, you want to see it translate to the Big Ten, so we left him off the list, but I would certainly keep an eye on him. Let's dig into Ethan Garbers, a guy that I think UCLA's offense gets a really bad rep. Obviously, true freshman Dante Moore struggled during his first year at the college level. When Ethan Garbers came in, the numbers were solid, and I thought he put UCLA in a lot of spots to win football games. How are you feeling about Ethan Garbers heading into 2024 here?
I think you're right. For the most part, he wasn't bad. It's just the one thing you really don't want to see him make some of those almost rookie mistakes. I felt like where, again, I think he easily plays over Dante Moore last year. But the issue was he was making some of the same mistakes. But again, he has some talent, obviously can run the football pretty effectively himself, can throw pretty effectively. So a guy who has a lot kind of there, but you got to cut the mistakes down.
When I look into Ethan Garbers, and I think what was tough is if you were going to clearly win that job for UCLA, you had to be a lot better than the five-star freshman Dante Moore. I don't know if Ethan Garbers was a ton better. He certainly was better, and had Dante Moore probably not been the bright five-star recruit, probably would have been your starting quarterback, Ethan Garbers, that is, in that 2023 season. I feel like people forget. Ethan Garbers is a very talented quarterback, too, was very sought after at the high school level. A lot of physical traits for Ethan Garbers to work with. If you see an offensive line that takes that step, I think there's some weapons around the quarterback to make some noise. I'm excited about Ethan Garbers in 2024. Now, getting into our top 10 list, and let's go to a transfer right off the bat. Georgia Tech nickel coming in KJ Wallace, has played a ton of football. I know you really like this kid coming from Georgia Tech. Tell us a little bit about what he brings to this UCLA program.
I think he kind of brings that versatile piece that almost every defense in the country is kind of looking for now. And you obviously need to replace a lot in that secondary, guys moving on, going on to other schools and so forth. But I think he kind of fills in a lot of different gaps. I think he can play pretty effectively at that safety role. He can cover in that nickelback role. So a guy who I think can fill a lot of gaps in the defense that kind of, as they're sort of bridging their Chip Kelly to DeShaun Foster era, I think he'll be really, really valuable for this team.
Yeah, and I think you look at UCLA's back end, it was phenomenal last year under Dan Lynn. You obviously lose a lot of key pieces. A couple guys going to USC. Bringing a guy that's played almost 1,500 snaps at the Power 5 level, that certainly helps that continuity. If you can just kind of keep that momentum from a UCLA defense that was one of the best units in the country last year, and I get you lose a lot to the portal, you lose a lot to the NFL draft, but you're kind of hoping that the culture of that elite defense is still there. And bringing in a guy like KJ Wallace certainly could help. Now, going to number 9, this was a crime, Dale. Logan Loya at number 9. I think he was so good for this UCLA offense last year, and it's not always flashy, right? J. Michael Sturdivant, a very good wide receiver who we're going to talk about a couple minutes from now. Yes, J. Michael Sturdivant made some of the flashier plays, probably the more talented wide receiver, but you talk about that safety valve in this UCLA offense, a guy that can create separation awfully quick in his route trees, operate after the catch. Logan Loy was that guy. Kind of flew under the radar. I think you're sleeping on my guy Logan Loy a little bit.
And that's fair. I almost, when I kind of look at the list and what I kind of think about everyone, there's part of me that thinks I'm almost too low on a handful of offensive guys. I think we'll get into Mookie next year at tight, or next spot at tight end. Guys who I think could have been far more productive if the offense is obviously clicking a little bit, and a lot of that was quarterback, offensive line. I think those are kind of the culprits of what was going wrong. But I think you're right. I mean, you have Sturdivant, you have Loya, you have some tight ends. This is a really, really good unit. Loya really good working out of that slot, running smooth routes, being open pretty frequently, and not dropping a ton of footballs. A guy who, again, I think should have a big year if they can just be a little bit more efficient and effective in quarterbacks making the right reads and getting the ball out.
Logan Loy is a guy that would definitely just benefit from a little bit more consistency. And you look at that UCLA offense last year, it was fits and starts. Like they would look good for a quarter, then the turnover bug would happen. They never seemed to put 4 quarters of solid play together consistently in games. If you can kind of get that momentum, a guy like Logan Loya is certainly going to benefit from that. Going to number 8, you kind of hinted at him. Mulkey Matavo, he was a tight end at Oregon, a kid that I loved out of high school. I know I probably said that name wrong. I'm saying I like him, messing up the name. Did 20 yards per catch at that tight end position, big frame work in the middle of the field, 11 first down catches. Lots to like about what this kid brings to this UCLA offense.
Yeah, I think the one big thing is I want to see him more involved in the pass game. I didn't think he got enough opportunities. I mean, big physical guy, runs really, really well. Felt like he was really hard for linebackers to deal with, especially just given his speed. But the other thing that really stands out is he can really block. And I thought all the UCLA tight ends, frankly, really blocked. And they picked up for some of the slack that I think was left by a pretty weak offensive line. But a guy who's really physical, he can block in space. I think a really, really complete tight end. Another guy that, frankly, I think more of us would be talking about if they had more steady quarterback play, because his numbers obviously are what they are, but he gets down the field pretty effectively, makes some of those bigger plays. And you should, again, one of those guys has a big year if their quarterback and offensive line just play better football.
Hey, with the running backs coach taking over, the run game is going to be active. Having good tight ends that can get it done blocking, especially in the Big Ten, that's going to be meaningful. Going to number 7, another offensive player here, running back TJ Harden. Really solid year for UCLA last year. Again, a guy that you might be low on, but then you start talking about the other 6 players, and I'm not necessarily, when I was previewing the list that you sent me, I'm not sure what players I'm going to put over TJ Harden. Runs the ball really physically. You want to see him continue to work through contact a little bit better. I look at him and say, hey, that's a running back that I think can deal with contact a little bit better. You look at Carson Steele last year. I thought he dealt with contact phenomenally. TJ Harden was a really good running back. I think there's a step for him to take in 2024.
Yeah, I like the system fit. I think he's really good in that zone scheme where he can kind of take that one, get his foot in the ground and go upfield, find his zones. I thought he was really, really effective in that. You can obviously use him in the pass game. So a guy who's just really effective, but I think you're right. Probably want to see a little bit more physicality, being able to run, kind of be that primary back a little bit more, especially with Carson Steele not being there anymore.
Going to number 6, and let's talk about a guy that I know you're low on, Cam Medrano. He won, super, super versatile, was second on the team in run stops, can get after the passer, can operate in space. I look at, kind of like we talked about with KJ Wallace, like players that are becoming so important in this modern era of college football. Cam Medrano is one of those guys. You want to see him clean up the missed tackle rate. I believe it was at 19.5%. This is a guy that you can do a lot of different things with. You talk about teams that want to make linebackers and second-level defenders operate in space. I think Cam Medrano can be one of those linebackers that operates really well in space.
No, and Kane Medrano is great. I don't think I'm low calling him the 6th best player in this team. I do think this defense especially has a lot of really good players, especially in that interior. I mean, Olu obviously or Femi, I should say, at that linebacker spot. I think it's one of the better linebackers in the conference. So I don't know that I'm low. Again, I think you love the playmaking ability he kind of gives you, and he does flash a fair amount. Yeah. But I think some of that play in and play out, being able to take on blocks maybe a little bit better, being able to tackle, obviously, at a more effective rate. I think some of those things you just want to see cleaned up. But, again, he makes those game-changing plays, and making game-changing plays is a huge part of being.
I think that's a really good point. And Cam Medrano is a guy that when you just kind of flick on a UCLA game and you're just watching it casually, you're like, that kid's awesome. And then you kind of watch some games back a little bit with a little bit of a closer eye, and you say, all right, the consistency can be a little bit better. If you can have those flashes, be a little bit more consistent, this is a really, really effective chess piece in a defense. Going to our number 5 player, Big Gary Smith. And he's not a guy that's going to dominate the box score stats, but you turn on UCLA, you talk about why that UCLA defense was so dominant. It really did start with some of the guys on the inside. Gary Smith, somebody that he can do the dirty work in the Big Ten, take on double teams, let your linebackers play downhill. He's also a guy that can get into the backfield at times, really nimble for the size. And I think Gary Smith is a guy that, again, flies under the radar because he's not a guy that's racking up the 10-plus sacks like some of the other UCLA players we saw last year, but a guy that's really important to this UCLA defense.
And I think you kind of start to appreciate how hard it is to find really good interior defensive line players. I mean, you see some of these teams in the portal and how desperate, and good teams. I mean, teams that recruit really well, develop really well, and they don't have those guys. I mean, Gary Smith, Jay Toy will be up on our list in a couple slots. Those two guys are really good. I mean, big physical players, both get off blocks pretty effectively. I love what Gary Smith does in terms of, especially, again, can eat blocks, can allow linebackers to play free. But as you kind of said, that ability to get off blocks, make tackles, make plays, I think it's a huge part of what made UCLA so good last year.
Number 4, Devin Kirkwood, really good player for UCLA. Dill, I think the stat that I love the most when I was kind of looking at some of these players you sent me over, 3.6% missed tackle rate for a guy that's forced to make a lot of tackles in space. That's an exceptional number. And you look at, again, why UCLA was such a solid defense last year. They did the fundamentals really well. You look at Michigan, why Michigan was such a good defense last year. They didn't miss tackles. In an era of college football where so many teams are just trying to get offensive playmakers in space, you have to have defensive backs that can get it done in space from a tackling standpoint. Devin Kirkwood's one of those guys.
Yeah, and then you complement that with just the coverage ability, what you have when you're 6'3" and really a smooth mover, I should say, you can get his hands on the football. So, Again, you kind of look, I think, really well developed by Danton Lynn last year. I think Danton Lynn came in, did a really good job with all those secondary players, frankly. So, again, had that raw talent, really long, really good athlete. I think you started to see more consistently. Frankly, you saw the completion percentages drop a little bit. You saw them being a little bit more sticky, having better instincts and going up and making plays. I think that's what you saw from Devin Kirkwood, and to have him back for another year to kind of be the leader of that secondary, I think is huge.
And what you'll say here is, all right, Devin Kirkwood played really good in the Pac-12 last year. There wasn't a conference that had better quarterback and wide receiver play than the Pac-12. You go to the Big Ten, and we're Michigan fans. You ain't going to see the passing attacks that you saw in the Pac-12. So if Devin Kirkwood's playing some good football in the Pac-12, you know he's going to be very solid in the Big Ten in 2024. Going to our top 3 players. And let's talk about Jay Toy, a guy that, again, not necessarily a box score warrior. There was a reason that when he hit the transfer portal for a brief moment, there was every single Power 5 program in the country was going after this kid. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say all those Power 5 coaches that were going after Jay Toy are idiots. Like, they obviously watched this kid. They know what he can do. He is one of the better interior defensive linemen that you see in the country. Him and Gary Smith, absolute force in the middle of this defensive line. You talk about UCLA translating to the Big Ten. I think it starts along the line of scrimmage. They got 2 guys that can certainly get it done.
And Jay Toy is a guy who I think if you kind of watch every game, I think you'd probably like to see that smooth out a little bit. I thought against like Utah, let's say, I didn't think it was a great game. You didn't really dominate the way I think you could. And then you flick on the Oregon State game, and you're like, oh, this guy's a hammer. And that's a really good offensive line Oregon State had. And just his ability to eat blocks up, get off blocks, make plays, just be really, really kind of that impact force in the middle that allowed some of their other linebackers to really shine. I thought they did. I thought Femi shined. I thought Mousy shined. Like, they had really good linebacker play. I think a lot of that started with the fact they had 2 guys in Toy and Smith who were just absolute hammers in the middle, especially when they were on and playing really good ball.
What you made me think of, and this will be a conversation we have with UCLA throughout the summers, just the consistency, right? Jay Toy, a really good player, probably inconsistent. You look at that offense, one of the more inconsistent units in the country. Then you look at this UCLA program as a whole. There's a week where they look like they're a top 15 team in the country. and then there's a week where they look like they shouldn't win over 4 games. And then you look at certain games like Colorado, you dominate one half, you kind of get your tail whooped in the second half. It just seemed like, I don't know if it's fair to blame Coach Kelly, but it just seemed like this team was like not showing up at certain spots. And you kind of hope DeShaun Foster can kind of get these guys up every single Saturday. Because again, last year you saw, I mean, this UCLA team be really good. You just want to see that version of the UCLA team every single Saturday. And I think a energetic head coach like DeShaun Foster certainly can bring that out. Going to our number 2 player, big time get back, J. Michael Sturdivant, 16.6 yards per catch, an average depth of target of 16 yards. Not many wide receivers that can work vertically down the field like J. Michael Sturdivant. I think this is one of the better wide receivers that you see in the Big Ten.
And when they were on, I mean, you go to that Coastal Carolina game, just how good he was, how effective he was with Dante Moore. And that guy, when they wanted to make those kind of big plays and those big-time NFL throws, he was the type of guy who, on that receiver spot, was able to make those type of catches for that offense. So, again, I think a very true number 1 guy. I'm very surprised, frankly, he wasn't in the draft last year. I thought he was going to go. Again, the numbers weren't great. I certainly don't think that was his fault. When he was given his chances to make plays, he made a lot of plays. I think just a really good number 1 guy, really versatile, can catch screens, run with the ball, can obviously run really good routes, and just his feel for playing in that deep intermediate range, I think, is really, really good.
He's the difference maker on this UCLA team. We talk about it all the time. You look at the best offenses, they're manufacturing explosive plays. You look at who's going to be the guy to manufacture those explosive plays, J. Michael Sturdivant's at the top of the list. Going to the number 1 player on this UCLA team, a guy that I was kind of surprised when you sent me him was your number 1 player, Olufemi Oladejo. Dill, sell the people on this kid heading into 2024.
I mean, he was so good. And I get they had good linebackers last year, so he didn't necessarily play every snap. But when he was on the field, I mean, first thing you see is his size. That is not the size most linebackers play with anymore. That's 6'3", 250, probably a little heavier than that, frankly, but doesn't give up a whole lot in terms of athleticism, has really good playmaking ability. And the one thing that really stood out to me is his kind of feel for that, being in that zone coverage scheme that Dan Lynn liked to run. I mean, just had good feel in his drops, was getting and throwing lanes, obviously could get his hands on the football. That, to me, I just think a really complete linebacker, has the size that not many guys can play with because they can't be athletic at that size. I don't think there's really much of an issue with his athleticism. He's really physical, takes on blocks really well. I just think a very complete linebacker that people aren't taking note of because he wasn't even necessarily – I don't even know if you'd call him a day 1 starter last year. I mean, he obviously got his touches towards the end of the year, or saw – he was on the field all the time, but it was – again, there were other starters.
I'll say this about Femi. He's a first guy off the bus kind of guy. Like, you're going to the Big Ten, you want the guy that's getting off the bus first. It's this kid. He looks like just an absolute animal. And more opportunity in 2024, you could see kind of him stand out as one of the better linebackers in the Big Ten. Dill, that'll do it. You know the boys are excited for UCLA in 2024. Kind of a team that a lot of people talk about programs with new head coaches during the offseason. Nobody seems to be talking about UCLA.
Well, I think people think UCLA is going to bottom out and win 2 games. Yeah. I think the Big Ten's in for a rude awakening. These teams like Minnesota, Illinois, or even Iowa who think they're going to roll over UCLA, because I just don't really see that. I think UCLA, again, they didn't obviously they had a fair amount of roster turnover. I don't think it was horrible by any stretch of the imagination. I think they have decent transfers coming in. To me, it's going to be about the offensive line. No guys in the top 10 on that. Yeah. That's probably the one glaring issue. I thought it was bad last year. And you bring in a couple guys, we'll see what they are. But if that unit plays okay, I mean, this is a team that I don't think teams Illinois.
By far the biggest storyline is the offensive line, because you do look at the Big Ten. There are a lot of good defensive lines. If this UCLA team wants to win games in the Big Ten, got to keep your quarterbacks protected. Got to be able to get the run game going. Exciting team that we're talking a lot about this summer. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.